Good morning. Welcome to More Tea Minister. My name is Ian. Today we are looking at a green oolong from Taiwan called Spring Jasper, and I bought it from taiwanleaftea.com. Before we begin, I should probably spend maybe a couple of minutes explaining what a green oolong is, and that will hopefully give us some context to talk about what's significant about this Taiwanese version of a green oolong. First of all, what's an oolong tea? An oolong tea is a partially oxidized tea. The oxidation that I'm referring to is a natural process that tea leaves undergo when they're damaged. And if you imagine that a green tea leaf has zero oxidation and a fully oxidized, 100% oxidized tea leaf is what we call black tea, an oolong is somewhere between more than 0% oxidation and less than 100. Now, my preference is for the green oolongs, those that have undergone a lower degree of oxidation. That's not to cast any shade upon the more oxidized oolongs. Some of them are firm favorites, especially those that have then been roasted. But in the simplest terms, I prefer the green oolongs, which on average have undergone somewhere between 10 to 20% oxidation. And if you look at the fully steeped leaves of the green oolongs, you'll find that they resemble very much green tea leaves, but with some browning around the edges, and that's the oxidation that we're talking about. Oxidation is a natural process the tea leaves undergo when they are damaged. And of course, a tea producer can prevent oxidation. A tea producer can instigate oxidation and can control how much oxidation actually takes place. That way, they control the finished product of tea and the flavor profile that comes with it. Now, why is it that I like the green oolongs? It's because they have a flavor profile that I describe as the 3 Fs. They're fresh, they're floral, and they're fruity. Now, green oolongs are really to be found with any tea plant that can be turned into an oolong, because they can all undergo a controlled amount of oxidation. So in theory, any tea plant or any batch of tea leaves can be oxidized minimally to produce a green oolong, or can be oxidized more fully, pushing it towards the black tea end of the spectrum. However, it's not desirable in every kind of strain of tea to have either a very oxidized finished product or a low oxidized product. Some strains of tea are more suited for one or the other, and that's especially true for any further processing that the oolongs might undergo, like baking or roasting. So we are looking at a green oolong from Taiwan. Now, green oolongs, the countries that are famous for producing green oolongs, or by which I mean the strains of tea that are best suited to green oolongs, well, there is China, which produces, amongst others, the famous Anshi family of green oolongs because they come from the Anshi region. And Taiwan is another strong contender for most famous green oolong producing country. Taiwan has for many decades now carried out a scientific enterprise to crossbreed tea plants. And the results of that crossbreeding are often strains or cultivars of tea that are ideal for producing green oolongs. In fact, many websites that will sell you Taiwanese green oolongs will mention in the extra details the cultivar for the tea here is TRES number what have you. And the TRES, I'm going to put my glasses on to make sure I get this right, is Taiwan's Tea Research and Extension Station. And the tea that we are looking at today is TRES number 19, BU, or Jasper. And hence we finally arrive at the name of this tea. Now, the vendor calls this tea Spring Jasper but that's understandable because it was a spring harvest of this year. But the tea is being named after the strain of tea that is being processed into oolongs. So how are we going to review today's tea? To do so, we're going to use the gong fu method rather than brewing it in a teapot, although it does work very well in a teapot. I've even brewed some of this tea in an almost set and forget style in this jug here, and it comes out admirably. However, in my own sort of experimenting on my own time, I've realized that putting this tea through the gong fu style of tea brewing allows for the different components of its flavor profile to be very carefully separated out, more by good luck than good guidance, I should say. And that has allowed me to not only be able to say, this steeping is really the floral one, this steeping is the fruity one, but by being able to separate them out, I don't know if you can hear that, that's the kettle again, I apologize. I've actually been able to give a name to the fruity profile, one that I haven't been able to do in any other green oolong. So we have a large cup, because I like this tea and I'll be drinking all of the steepings. I have my trusty transparent jug for collecting the brewed tea from each steeping. I have my equally trusty wide-brimmed strainer, which we need for the rapid pouring that you need with gong fu. And in place of a teapot, I'm using this gaiwan. Eagle-eyed people who know gaiwans will know that there is a saucer missing, but I broke the saucer because amateur, but the gaiwan itself still works. What's a gaiwan? I've heard it described as a tureen for tea, and I rather like that. As you can see, it's not significantly wider than it is deep, but even in a small space, it still allows for plenty of room for tea leaves to move in water, water to move around tea leaves, or for particular interest to us, it allows for tea leaves to expand, which is where I need to show you what these tea leaves look like. Hopefully you can get some sense of what they are if I hold it here. That doesn't look like tea leaves. That's because each tea leaf has been rolled into what is effectively a bead. And that makes them, amongst other things, ideal for being vacuum packed and for storage and transportation. They don't get damaged. Whereas if you remember our review of Kyobancha, because that's unfurled leaves, it needs a big amount of packaging, and there's always the risk that the tea leaves will get damaged in transit. So, what are the brewing parameters for this tea? Well, it's boiling water. These leaves are pretty robust, and not only can they take boiling water, they really need it to get the flavor out. You also need to use a high proportion of leaf to water. If the average kind of ratio of tea to water for a gaiwan is 1 to 20, 1 gram of water to 20 mils, 1 gram of tea to 20 mils of water. With this tea, it's 7 grams of tea to 100 mils of water. So that's quite a shift in the ratio, but this tea may be a little reluctant to release its flavor, but I think the flavor is well worth that extra amount of tea. So, the first thing we're going to do is to put our leaf into our preheated gaiwan, preheated as always. Same with the jug, same with the cup. The next thing that we can do is consider the fact that these leaves are rolled. They're tightly packed and they're dry. The first steeping we get from gong fu is really not going to work unless we do one of two things. We either have to rinse the leaves for a matter of seconds with just a tiny bit of water, or the first steeping has to be really quite prolonged because you're having to account for the extra time needed for heat and water to start to get into the leaves and to unfurl them. It's only after a couple of prolonged steepings that you're that the full extent of the flavour can come through. What we're going to do is to rinse the tea leaves, and we're just going to put it into our pot for collecting here because it really is very little and it's not going to dilute the flavour. So just a tiny bit of our boiling water, just a few seconds, let it rinse. We need to put, usually a gaiwan is ideal for quick pouring, but at least for the first couple of steepings, which are slightly prolonged, as we've said, it's just good practice to use the wide-brimmed streamer. The wide, yes, that was right, wide-brimmed strainer, not streamer. So there we go with the rinse. Our next steeping will be for quite a bit of time. We're not going to fully unfurl the leaves or fully steep them in this first steeping because we're trying to avoid having any bitterness that comes from over steeping the leaf. But we're going to put in 100 ml. I can guess where that is by the shape of the gaiwan on the inside. And we're going to give that somewhere about 30 seconds. I will keep an eye on it, and we'll start to see how unfurled the leaves are. The good thing about a gaiwan as well is that some of that liquid, some of that water that's got the tea steeping in it, it's condensing on the inside of the lid, which means you can also judge when the tea is starting to steep because you get the smell condensing on the lid of the gaiwan. Now, what I won't do is give you an extended lesson on how to use a gaiwan because, as I hope is completely clear, I am an amateur and I'm still learning the intricacies of using a gaiwan. Suffice it to say that you can tip the lid further into the rim of the gaiwan itself, and that produces a narrow gap out of which the water can pour. It's still good practice to have a strainer, even when you have rolled oolong leaves like these, and you've got pretty large leaves, even when they haven't filled. So this is our first official steeping, but I'm not expecting this to be too strong because it's, let me show you, the leaves are only now starting to unfurl. But some colour has come through and I can already smell a steeping on the tea. It's very fresh. That's what I really value in this tea, as I think I've explained. I'm going to pour it into the jug, into my cup, I beg your pardon, which is hopefully big enough, just. And in the interests of saving time, I'm going to put in the second steeping, which can still go in the jug, even before I've actually reviewed the first one. So there we are. That's our second steeping underway, and already that's now enough water that I can visibly see the leaves unfurling in the gaiwan. Let's put the lid on for the sake of keeping the heat in, and let's see what we have here. As I say, there's freshness, there's a little bit of fruit, but most of what's coming out is the floral quality. So it's two of the three F's that we're really picking up, the fresh and the floral. And that's already coming out. And this tea, as I say, isn't properly unfurled or properly steeped, but already I could be able to tell you it's a green oolong, albeit at this point it tastes like a slightly diluted one. Let's see how our second steeping is doing. Let's have a smell. There's a more ripe kind of flavour that's coming off the tea now, and that's another slightly extended brewing, and I can see that some of those leaves are completely unfurled. Some of them still need a bit of encouragement. So let's get this steeping into our jug. I didn't show you the color from the previous one, but hopefully you can pick up on the fact that this one is now a lovely kind of gold green color. It's a very inviting color. Let's have a see what this one is like in the fruits there. A little bit of floral, but that second steeping just changing it slightly. It's the fruit that's come out. I'm not yet going to commit myself to what that fruit is, but hopefully, as has been the case when I've done this before, the third steeping will give us a much clearer picture of what to expect. So the leaves are mostly unfurled, but not all the way. So hopefully this last steeping, and we'll give it another 30 seconds or so, will be the one to really coax the flavour out of the tea. And incidentally, I should point out that the tea leaves have now they've now taken up about 60% of the gaiwan. I'll show you afterwards once we've drained this steeping, and you'll hopefully get an appreciation of why a gaiwan is a good idea. A small teapot, you'd be hard pressed to get the leaves out for one thing, let alone make sure there's enough room. And a larger teapot simply isn't practical for the kind of rapid, frequent steepings that you have with gong fu. So let's try this one. That fruit, it's a heady fruit. It's much stronger in the cup than it was in the jug. It's a heady, ripe kind of fruit, almost musky. Mm. Before we finish it, let's see how that steeping is doing. The fruit is still there. Very, very sweet. We're going to give it a few more seconds longer while I finish this one, but this is extraordinarily fruity and ripe in its fruit. Let's pour this one, because the last thing you want to do is to watch a bald man drinking tea without there being any end in sight. So let's pour our water. And hopefully that will allow us to make a conclusion. This is almost certainly not going to be the last steeping you could obtain from this tea, but it will be for our purposes. Otherwise, this video will be ridiculously long. The fruit is there. Still quite ripe, but more sweet than ripe, I would say. Now, I'm not going to drink all of this one because, again, it just adds to the time. As we let that cool for a few seconds, I want to show you the leaves in the gaiwan, and hopefully you can see the kind of size difference now that they are fully steeped. They're still fairly compacted into the gaiwan here, but they're fairly unfurled, and I'm trying to see if I can show you an oxidized one, but I think that's a bit of a fool's errand. So let's make sure I don't spill any of that. Let's take a sip of our final steeping. As you move from the second steeping into the third, the intensity of the fruits died down, but that makes it slightly easier. The fruit, to my mind, in this is a ripe melon. It's musk melon. And it's extraordinary on that second steeping, even before the leaves are fully unfurled, you get a much stronger fruity profile than you do floral, whereas the first one, it's the other way around. So this video is already taking far too long. Can I recommend this tea? Well, yes. I can't recommend it necessarily on ease of availability. I haven't seen it available anywhere else but the vendor in question. But Green Oolongs from Taiwan and elsewhere are available from any number of vendors. So if you would like to explore Green Oolongs, then that is perfectly possible online from any number of reputable vendors. Can I recommend it on the taste? It's delightful. It's absolutely delightful to have such a strong, ripe, fruity flavor to go with the freshness and the floral quality. And how about ease of brewing? Well, the Gaiwan takes a wee bit of practice, but as I say, it's perfectly possible if you want to have the floral and the fruity in tandem rather than separating it out, then brewing it in a jug is easy as brewing it in a very large teapot. So hopefully, as always, this review has been of some interest and some use. It only remains for me to say happy steeping and also to say God bless.